Startups Inside Out. We have Thuria here today. Can you tell us about what you do and what you built?
Yeah, so thank you very much for having me on the show. So my name is Thuria. I am the CEO of Evaro. For what we try and do is we're trying to build online banking, but for healthcare, which sounds kind of insane when I say it in that short sentence, the kind of punchy sentence. But if I try and paint it with an analogy, the goal is to try and build a version of healthcare that genuinely is as easy to access as online banking. We believe it's going to take 30 years. I'm 8 years in. I have 22 years to go. And it's an incredible journey.
You're being very humble there by saying trying, because you've done quite a lot already. So tell us where you are now.
Yeah, so what we do as a business is we allow people to access prescription medication over the internet without having to see their doctor. A lot of this is done algorithmically with clinicians in the loop. And to be able to actually do it, you have to own the whole chain. So if I take us back to kind of the business as incorporation, by background, I was a software engineer whose parents told me they would disown me if I did not study medicine. So lo and behold, in the Middle Eastern fashion, I went and applied for medical school, got into medical school and studied medicine. My original thought processes were to be a military medic. So I joined the University Air Squadron. I really liked that ability to make order out of chaos. Really serves well in startup land. Turns out, because I've got dual nationality, it wouldn't make sense because I would not stay in the UK. So in the end decided, let's not do military medicine, let's do emergency medicine. So roughly the same sort of desire to try and be in that heat of the moment, fix the problem, bring order to chaos. The challenge, however, was when I entered the working world. A&E wasn't as chaotic as I was hoping. I generally was looking for heart attacks, amputated legs, people in car crashes. Like that was what I was looking for. What I ended up seeing was people with acid reflux, people who had urinary tract infections, people with really serious migraines, who were coming to A&E out of desperation because their GP appointment was 2-3 weeks away. And we're talking back in 2017 without all the technology advancements we have in today's day and age. And you had NHS 111 that was directing people to A&E, people reaching desperation point. And I remember looking at all these people in the waiting room thinking, surely there has to be a better way. And so we built an algorithm. The algorithm was just literally a series of questions. It's the same questions I would ask in a face-to-face appointment as a doctor, and just turned into a quiz format. And the hypothesis was, if we added this to the end of NHS 111, when they say go to A&E, if someone just needed prescription medication, you could then be like, okay, cool, you don't actually need to go to A&E, but you do need an emergency prescription. Go here for your UTI treatment or your migraine medication or your shingles treatment. Somehow, I managed to build a version of this and get it in front of people at NHS England. So I don't know how I actually managed to get that meeting, like just sheer tenacity. And then they laughed me out the room. Like it was one of the most disappointing conversations I've ever had. And in hindsight, I do get it. But back then I was 24 years old, full of ambition. I was only seeing the world through my lens, which was obviously this is going to make things better. Now I understand the need for data and trials, risk mitigation, all these other things.
But it's in a way, like I think we had the same thing recently where when we first started and we pitched people, I remember being so annoyed at people. But it's like now look, it's like, I would never have said yes to me. And it's interesting how you need that delusion in a way, just otherwise you wouldn't start.
Absolutely. There has to be absolute optimism and faith and not a single doubt that you are going to do something and you can actually make something better for the world.
And you also said as well that you were looking for the car crashes and stuff like that. Where do you think that came from? Like, why were you looking for that?
That's a really good question. Straight into childhood psychology. We were an immigrant family that came to the UK in the kind of classic Middle Eastern version, or I guess even just expanded to all Asian households, or I'm stereotyping here, I guess. You had to be exceptional, right? You had to be the problem solver to get the pat on the back, the attention from dad. You essentially became a Swiss Army knife to be as useful as possible to your parents And then that transition happens to how you show up for your friends, how you show up for your extended community. So being able to find chaos meant that I could be the hero. And for a lot of the early days of bootstrapping a business, that served me well. In the recent months of scale up, it has been a really interesting identity crisis where you then have to be like, right, I'm not the bottleneck anymore. I need to find a way to make sure I empower other people to be able to make these decisions in a way that I would ideally like those decisions to be made when I'm not in the room. And that has been hard.
So far you've been very humble, and I think people might not get the idea of just how much impact you already made. And you said about being exceptional, right? So how many patients have been served through what your work is, and tell us some of the numbers here.
Yep. So, oh God, we are now supporting about 45,000 patients each month. We started off, for example, supporting only 9 patients a day. We support patients across 500 different treatment areas, 500 different medications, 80 different treatment areas. So that's ranging from migraines to obviously the weight loss stuff. It's menopause, it's testosterone replacement treatment. I think the big arcs that we look at are things that are painful enough to people, but actually can be done in an online healthcare setting. So you're looking at pain management, longevity medicine, you're looking at things that may not even be available on the NHS. So we've recently started a service offering tadalafil, which is a medication for male erectile dysfunction to women. To have better orgasms. Because ultimately, if you think about embryology, the same way in which the male genitalia are formed is the exact same way the female genitalia are formed. So if one medication works in one area, hypothetically it works on the other, and we then run things equivalent to a phase 4 human study.
So obviously 45,000 patients a month is incredible. Yeah. But you said we only did 9 patients at the beginning. Yeah. But obviously each of those 9 patients, you're making quite a big difference to each of their lives.
Yes.
So only 9 patients is still actually quite a bit for them.
Yes, that's true. I think if I generally look at it, it feels so small because the desire is to build something that's supporting an 8 billion people planet. And that's when I said this 30-year time frame. So if I take that analogy back to online banking, 30 years ago, if you wanted to send money to your mother, £50 to your mum, you had to call work and say, excuse me, I need to take time off work. You had to get into your car, drive to the local bank branch. You wait in a queue. You see this beautiful cashier. She goes clickety clack, clack, clack. And then the money goes from your account to your mother's, and you've lost half a day. And actually, that is kind of what we're doing with healthcare right now. You take time off work, you go to the GP, you see the GP for a 10-minute appointment, you then have to run around to different pharmacies to get your prescription. But a lot of it can be algorithmic. And I know that sounds really scary, but it was scary in the banking world. We thought it was mortifying. But right now, me and you and most of the viewers would think it's ludicrous to physically travel to a bank to ask for £50 to go from your account to your mother's. And so what we're trying to build is a version of healthcare that kind of is this new way of thinking, and it's going to take time. Right? And what we've seen with banking, which has been really interesting, is it's been a phased approach. First, you could see your bank transactions. Then you're able to do the transfers. After the 2008 financial crash, you know what we learned? We learned making a decision on if you could have a loan based on data. It's a really good way to make a decision. And so we're looking at healthcare now. And, you have someone who's an asthmatic, and you're getting them to cough into their phone microphone, and you're working out their lung volume, and you're charting in the data from previous asthma attacks, today's pollen count, the pollution count of the city that they're in, and you're saying, hey, maybe you shouldn't be on 1 puff of your asthma steroid inhaler today, maybe you should be on 2 puffs for this period of time whilst your lung volume is so tight. So it's building this completely different version of healthcare, not just what healthcare is online. And I know we have video call services in the healthcare space that mean people don't have to travel to their GP practices. But the reality is banking was not sold with video calls to the cashier. We have an 8 billion people planet. We will never have the amount of cashiers to be able to service the sheer volume of financial transactions that exist. And likewise with healthcare, we are never going to have enough doctors, pharmacists, physicians associates, nurses, everyone else in the loop to actually support people in the way that they really should be supported. We can support them in a way that, with economic considerations is the sickest of the sick get help, but that's not really how you build the best population health on a individual level.
Yeah.
And you said about there, obviously you bootstrapped at the beginning and you were kind of that force of nature there. What were it's like, okay, you did your first algorithm, got laughed at NHS England. How did you then get that initial traction, start getting people to really test this out properly?
Yeah, so in the early days, I built a website. Oscar, my co-founder, quit his job. He was the manager of the local Asda pharmacy. We both signed a lease for a 2,000 square foot warehouse, which I thought was ludicrous at the time. Most pharmacies are shoe cupboards, and we had this massive space that essentially was a glorified ping pong room. It was about 3 minutes away from the house. And it was 1,500 per month. We knew nothing about VC land. So I was locoming, Oscar was locoming in our free time to be able to pay for this. We got counters, like IKEA tables, counters, you kind of silicone them into the wall and stick them in. We got secondhand shelving from a closing down Maplin store. And it was just literally scrappy everything. We didn't even have flooring. It was just the chips and the concrete that was painted once upon a time. And thankfully, Oscar, with his experience and his connections within the management role at the Asda pharmacy, his previous experience at Superdrug Online Pharmacy, he was able to get all the regulatory stuff for the pharmacy over the line. And I simply built the tech and the clinical decision-making protocols.
Just the tech. Yeah.
Just the tech. I mean, it was questionable. I think like it was an ugly looking website. It probably spoke to how desperate people were back in like September 2018, I think was when we went live, for them to buy something from a website that was that dodgy looking. I remember going around to family and friends being like, hey, do you mind giving us a Trustpilot review so we can try and get like at least 10 5-star ratings so it doesn't look like we're a nobody and people aren't chancing it. But yeah, I think our first ever customer is still a loyal customer today. Yeah, it's quite interesting. That first customer came back in 2 weeks later to order a different medication. So immediately we saw like this has legs. We needed 11 orders a day to break even, excluding salaries. So that was rent, that was electricity. Yeah. And so very early on, we knew that we were onto something.
I think that's an important point you made there as well, because I think so many first-time founders are so obsessed with how it looks and all that stuff. But if you're really solving the problem, people aren't going to care about what color it is or whatever it is. They're going to use the software for what it does.
Yeah.
And the fact that you did that, I think, obviously says a lot in terms of having the right mentality.
Skateboard first. Build a skateboard, then build a bicycle, then build a car, then maybe build a rocket ship.
Yeah. And once you got to that point of, okay, you're getting your 11 orders a day, how did you go from there to like, maybe this is something you could really scale? Or when did that mindset start to shift?
Yeah, so I think at the time we were looking at advertisement, and Oscar and I paid for a marketing agency to come in. I think we paid £5,000. Bear in mind, all of this was out of pocket cash. And they did jack shit. They did maybe keyword research, and we received this, and both Oscar and I looked at this, and this was before the ability to use large language models to actually reach that area of the knowledge matrix where you don't know what you don't know. We looked at this and we're like, this is not that hard. My mother has a beautiful saying, which is, so he has 2 hands, I have 2 hands, he has 2 eyes, I have 2 eyes. Anything he can do, I can do. And so we looked at it and we were like, well, you know what? We're relatively intelligent people. Oscar is a pharmacist by background with a PhD in anti-aging, right? He is a smart man. And so he just went into the depths of Reddit forums and Google to just understand what marketing is. And to this day, Oscar still owns all the marketing of the business. I think it's probably the main reason why we are as successful as we are and our customer acquisition costs are as low as they are, because we have someone who deeply, deeply cares about the success of the business and the longevity of the business, rather than just becoming another business that, you know, is a charity funding Google fueled by VC money. You have someone who's really thinking like, is this actually valuable? And I mean, Oscar will be working and tweaking ads on a Sunday at 10 p.m. because he's got an alert and he's paying attention. I don't know if you'd get that if you're outsourcing to an agency. So that was probably one of the key pivotal things that allowed us to grow. And there were so many experiments done. It's the type of blog posts, it's the putting flyers around university, and it's trying to convince The Concrete, which was the University of East Anglia's newspaper, to do a piece about STI chlamydia during Freshers Week. So there's a lot of guerrilla creative marketing done in the early days. Now there's a very large marketing team. We have a chief commercial officer. It's interesting to see how that's grown.
Yeah, how big is your team now?
Growing constantly. The last time I checked, it was 164 people. By the last time I checked, it's the amount of Christmas cards I've just written.
It's a good way of doing it, right?
Yeah, I wrote 164 Christmas cards.
So, obviously, you said so. Oscar's like owning the marketing side, right? And then as like CEO, you're owning some of the other parts. But like as you started to grow, where was it that you started to think, like, we need to hire here first, and did you get that right, or do you think maybe you messed up the order there?
So we took a really long time to hire senior leaders of the business. Rightly, wrongly, I actually don't know yet, because when I say really long time, our CFO only came in November, just gone.
So it's December that we're recording this, so it's like literally last month. Yeah.
Yeah, he's been in post for just under a month.
You got this far without a CFO at all?
Yeah, I learned a lot of stuff to run this business. So, the financials, everything else. We bootstrapped for 5 years. We then took our first ever external fundraise from VCs. We took a really small amount. We took just under $1.5 million. And we took out secondaries in that, which I think is really important to share, that we had the audacity to ask for secondaries. And we did the same thing at our Series A. I think it's really important to recognize that my entire financial risk lies in this business. And so there were some decisions that would be brilliant for the business that I was probably not willing to make, because actually the risk was too high for me personally. Whereas when you then decouple them, you're like, actually, this is the bet I really want to make. I am now safe. My bills are covered, mortgage is covered, that kind of stuff. Therefore, I'm okay doing this. And I would encourage all founders to ask, at the very minimum, if they're doing an investment round, to see if they can take something off. I think in our first round, it was probably like 50 grand each. It wasn't huge, but it was meaningful enough to provide some level of safety. Yeah, so in our first financing round, that $1.5 million, we simply took the money to move warehousing. So remember that 2,000 square foot warehouse that I said was stupidly large? No, it wasn't big enough. So we raised money purely to move. We had some ridiculous line items and what we ended up thinking we would need, what I was actually comfortable spending. I think, having grown up very poor, some things look practically reasonable and probably from a times perspective makes sense. But in reality, there's a piece inside of me that just did not align with it. So for example, in our new warehouse, which is 12,000 square feet, currently being expanded to 18,000 square feet, we were building these tables that are 3 meters long, 113 centimeters high, to make sure that they're regulatory requirements for the pharmacy fulfillment. To have them bought, they're 2,700 pounds. To make them myself, they're under 700. So it was buying IKEA shelving, roughly like this, Oscar angle grinding them to the right size, and then me getting kitchen counters, putting them on, like standing on top of these tables with a circular drill that would be able to make grommets, so you can put all the cables for the computers inside. Yeah, the thought process is, we need 40 of these tables at almost 3 grand for 40 tables. That's 120,000 pounds. Yeah, you could capitalize it, whatever. But we're not doing accountancy magic here. This is real cash leaving the business. It doesn't matter if it sits on your balance sheet. It is actual cash leaving your business. And I'm not an accountant, therefore cash is king. Whereas if I made them myself in the order of when we needed them, you're never going to have that 120,000 pound disappearing thing. So although it was something that we asked for in our fundraise, we never actually did it. Because when push came to shove, I realized I was never going to be comfortable with it. It was also things like, we said we would get nice new office chairs so people felt comfortable. Nope, they were all secondhand. Yep. Some of them needed to get additional pieces from AliExpress for the cushions on the armrest, because they came and they were a bit damaged. But you take a picture, AliExpress gives you the rough thing, you bring it in, maybe hammer it in a little bit. It's good enough. I say that as if everything's breaking. It's not. Everything looks very legitimate now, but we are still quite scrappy. So that was us growing in 2023, where we were about 20 people. At the end of 2024, we were then 81 people, and I started to feel the pain of having 81 direct reports. And I was like, okay, I now need to raise money to hire a C-suite. And yeah, we went out. We thought we were going to raise a quarter of what we actually ended up raising. We thought we were going to be valued in terms of nothing. Because obviously in VC land, people will pay for what they think you're worth. We had very large discrepancies between what people thought we were worth, whether it was, I think our highest pre-money valuation that was offered, or was talked about was 20 times revenue, which would have killed us. Like, that is not a sensible way to run a business. That is not how you get to 30 years of existence. So we went with a VC who actually had a lot of medical doctors at the table because they aligned with 30-year vision. They aligned with the fact that if something maybe wouldn't make sense from a commercial perspective, but was being made, like the decision was coming from putting a Hippocratic oath before everything else. I think it felt like you weren't going to be giving away a chunk of the business to people who are going to be your overlords. And then they say money is king. Like, you have to remember, as a healthcare business, spending 8 years acquiring 7 different regulations, technically we could be very, very dangerous, right? Hypothetically, you could sell opiates over the internet. All it takes is someone who's incredibly greedy to say, I'm firing Thuria CEO, I'm firing Oscar as COO, we're now putting someone else in, you're now going to sell opiates, we're all going to make a lot of money, and we're going to cause a lot of harm to the world. And so for us, value alignment was one of the most important things. So we raised a second round this year in April. We hired a C-suite, and over the last few months, they've been coming in, and I've been learning to let go.
Wasn't about this journey, like you said, like you were so scrappy at the beginning, and then, so you said 2023, 80 people, now over 160. That's such a different style of leadership, as you said, right? And being able to make that transition, like, how has that been? Like you said, like it's difficult, and you said it's hard, but like, how have you had to adapt, or have you made any like personal changes, or like letting go? Like, how have you been able to let go? Like, if somebody's in that position now, with okay, I now need to hire lots of people, but at the same time, I feel this ownership and I don't want to let go. How did you deal with it? How are you dealing with it?
In some cases, reluctantly. I think the first time I saw a job offer contract and in front of me that I had not been present in the CV, the interview, or anything like that, that was scary. But I actually recognize we've grown a really impressive team of people. I actually asked a lot of founders and the VCs that we were speaking to, what were the reasons why you fired CEOs in some of your portfolio companies? And often it was about this adaptation from going from startup mentality to scale-up mentality, the need for more process, even though it slows you down. How do you get the correct balance? I don't think we're at the correct balance. I think we've overcorrected a little bit, and we'll come back. And it's this deep humility of being able to reflect on yourself and accept that if someone is giving you criticism or feedback, ultimately it's a gift. They are only sharing that with you for you to be better. So I had one of the venture partners at our main VC call me up one day after I was working with the recruiters for the CFO. And they're like, hey, you need to own this process more. You're being really passive. I was like, okay, what does that look like? And so having a conversation really bluntly that says, hey, the way that you're handling this, you should not be giving more ownership to the recruiters, regardless of the fact that this is their bread and butter. They've done it millions of times. This is still your process. You need to be more demanding. I was like, okay, cool. I'll amp up that abrasiveness that needs to exist in this particular relationship. I got myself an exec coach who on a weekly basis, I go and ask, hey, I'm having this problem. These are my thoughts. I specifically went for someone who was in healthcare, ran companies bigger than me, because sometimes I don't want to be coached. I just want the answer. And I'll give you a really stupid example. We were going through, I think people having finance cards to be able to make purchases, and our Figma licenses were going really high. And I was like, why the hell do all these people have Figma licenses? Like, half these people don't need to make edits. They're just looking at it. What's going on here? And it was really bothering me. Like, the level of control was really bothering me. And I was having this conversation with Dwayne, who used to be the ex-CEO of EMIS. And he was like, trying to coach. I was like, no. I just need a number. What is the number that I should care about? And I was like, okay, the realistic is going to be this number. Knowing you, after a few months, you're not going to accept that number, so start here. Anything below this amount, just let them make it and just ignore it. And anything above this amount, you care. Great. So sometimes having someone who's done it before and be like, hey, here is what you really need to be doing in this particular case. And then it's the reviewing of that behavior on a regular basis. Yeah.
Even that process of getting an exec coach, right? Because I know for some founders, that's it's like a release of control itself, right? It's like, oh, I don't need a coach. Like,
a lot of founders.
So how was that a process which you knew you wanted to do someday, or like how did you get to the position where you were comfortable to say, okay, no, I want somebody to help me in this side of things?
I think for me, it wasn't so much I want getting comfortable. It was finding the right person. So actually, I am the sort of person who really likes feedback. I've been told by many of my employees that I receive feedback really well, mostly because I do take it as a gift. Like, it's never being given out of malice. It's always being given, rightfully or wrongly. Like, the other person feels something, and whether you intended it or not, they still feel that thing. So, regardless of how I want to defend my actions, I have let someone down, or I've done something that has caused hurt in some way, and they've decided to come back and give me feedback, or there's something I could do that's better. And so I've always been comfortable with receiving that level of criticism. What I found really difficult in the early days were coaches who maybe has never actually done the lived experience and were trying to give advice from a hypothetical sense. I do get that. I do get that you don't actually need someone who's done it before. They can bring out the thought process internally. I don't want to do that with a person. I can do that myself. I can do that with ChatGPT, right? Like, I want to sit with somebody like, hey, these are my thoughts. These are my thinking. Here's my 6 approaches. Which one should I take? I think that's a little bit how we also study medicine. So you go to your consultant and you say, hey, I've got this person, they've complained of chest pain. I've done these investigations. Here's my differential diagnoses. I think I'm going to go in this direction. Yes or no? And so I guess that's a little bit of the training that comes in from medical school and being a doctor, being brought out into how I receive external input.
And what do you think you've learned most from your employees? So when they're giving you feedback, what have you learned from that?
Oh, really good question. I think most recently, and I'll paint this with an analogy, it's the need for getting clearer directions. So if I paint it through something else, once upon a time, I was able to get into a car and drive south, and knowing full well that we had 4 cars behind us, 5 people in each car, they'd be able to follow me, it's fine. If the road diverged, I could, on a gut feeling, go left or right, and everything's fine. We now have 164 cars on the road. Not everyone can see me. And so what the team were crying out for a very long time was an address that they could all drive towards. And actually, I don't think I'm there yet to be able to give an address, but what I can give is a checkpoint city along the way. So then we can then iterate, like, hey, did we actually do what we wanted? Are we on track? Do we need to go somewhere else? Is it left? Is it right? Is it continuing to go downwards? So I don't know the final destination yet. I think, frankly, if you have a 30-year goal, it is very hard to have an exact final destination, but I've gotten a lot better at giving a direction.
And you mentioned as well about taking the VC money, right? After so long being bootstrapped and doing it yourself. How is that also that decision to now go down the hyperscaling route? Because you said you've always had a long-term vision of 30 years, but obviously having VCs on board, even if they do have the Hippocratic Oath and they have the right values, the same issue, it's a different path, right? Like, to go from a 20-person team to now hundreds of people, potentially even more. Like, how has that transition been in terms of, or what made you take that decision? And now is the right time for us to go for it.
I think there's 2 things. We definitely had the privilege of market forces behind us that meant that we were growing quite rapidly outside of VC money. So last year we were growing an average of 36% month on month. This year we had months where we were growing 54%. It's been excruciatingly painful, but there are obviously worse pains that businesses could have. We have only started using the VC money that we raised back in April. And the stuff that we raised in 2023, I think we barely touched a lot of it before we did it. I think a big part of having the VC money is the permission to go faster, and the permission to know that you've got a safety blanket if necessary, and to have these bigger bets when certain foundational elements are in place. So the team to be able to scale something, the infrastructure to be able to actually get more orders out the door, so the bigger warehousing, etc. But keeping that discipline of saying hey, we're going to do it in these different ways. I think we did a really good job at actually finding the VCs that we wanted. So when we had this 54% growth month earlier this year, actually that was a really important lesson in greed. We grew far too much that month. We tanked our Trustpilot rating from 4.7 stars to 4.4. We did not need to do that. And so I called up the VCs on the board. I was like, hey, we made a mistake. We need to kill all ad spending for the next 12 days to be able to catch up, because this is not the business I want to run. And they were very, very respectful of that. I imagine if we were loss-making, hemorrhaging cash, we were there was a clear destination to death, they would have a very different approach. But at the moment, we've been in a privileged position where we've been able to have them on our side and say, hey, this is the foundational year. We're trading significantly ahead of the forecast. We haven't actually burnt any of the money yet. So we want to take this moment to really check ourselves before we go forward. So yeah, part of it is the relationships, part of it is just the position that we're in.
And I think you mentioned an interesting point. There's like, how do you balance out that need to grow, not necessarily need to grow, but the faster you grow, the more people you can impact, the bigger difference you can make, the more revenue you make, the bigger you can grow the team, all of that stuff. But like you said, like being in the healthcare industry and really genuinely caring about each individual patient at the same time, like how do you find that middle ground? Because you said like you went too fast, now you're gone back a bit.
I actually think more often than not, we operate from a clinician first mindset. Like most of the team at the top table in the business are clinicians, whether they're pharmacists, doctors, A&E doctors, GPs, etc. So actually more often than not, we have people suggesting that we go a little bit faster. We take a few more risks. We tend to err on the side of caution. I think also if you're trying to build something that exists for 30 years, there is the confidence that it is not a land grab. This is an 8 billion people planet. Healthcare is an 8 billion people problem. It's not going to be a one company wins all situation. If anything, the kind of way that I look at what Evaro does is we are changing the way that people understand asynchronous healthcare. And at some point, audacious statement here, think a little bit like how Tesla came to the market and now every other car manufactures EV cars. Right? We don't actually need to be the winner to get what my goal is for changing healthcare. We just need to be big enough to drive the change, to be able to hold people accountable to gold standards of safety, because actually you do also get bad actors in the world. To show them that, hey, you can be profitable, you can be successful, you can be scaling whilst being affordable to patients, whilst being incredibly safe.
You mentioned about the 8 billion people planet.
Yeah.
Where do you operate at the moment? Is it primarily UK? Are you operating in other countries too?
So we currently operate in the UK, but some of our licenses are pre-Brexit. So we're grandfathered into old rules, which means we can actually service a few countries in Europe. We simply haven't because it would be spreading ourselves too thin. I expect us to start experimenting and running pilots in that space over the next year.
And you said about how you don't know, you know the meaning of what you want to try and do, but you don't necessarily know the address or where to send the team just yet.
Yeah.
But you know some checkpoints that are coming.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do now, so we're 270 something episodes in, but we get people on again 2 years later, so like 200 episodes later, and we need to get like a TV or something here. I don't know how we're going to do it yet. Have a screen up here, and then we'll play back this moment in 2 years' time. You come on again. Or like in 2 years' time, like what do you hope to have come on and say you've been able to achieve?
That's a really beautiful idea. So I think this year, the way that I thought about it, I read a lot of comics. I thought about this arc as being the foundation building. So we bootstrapped ourselves. A lot of stuff was kind of built with duct tape. I say that in a very self-depreciating way, obviously still within regulatory compliance. But it was not set up in a way to scale in the long term. So this year has been kind of killing all that tech debt, all the areas of code that didn't have comments because I wrote it. Our wonderful dev team have had a great, painful year of replatforming, moving us onto infrastructure like GCP that actually has more elasticity. So this is the arc for building the foundations. It's actually having line management structures. It's putting in OKRs. Next year is pilots, experimentations. So when I think of the treatment areas that we support, we currently support 80 health areas. By the end of the year, we're hoping to be supporting 250 health areas. So that's your high conviction areas, the things that are going to be super impactful. Your core areas, so things that impact people's health, but may not take up a ridiculous amount of population. And then your long tail. And so that's stuff that we just do because we already have the stuff in place. It's never going to drive us lots of money, but it makes a massive difference to a person's life to be able to give them access to those small areas. And across that, we're moving away from just doing kind of the transactional piece with patients, which is your money and your data for our medication. So what we do with that data is we obviously build these machine learning models that help assist our clinicians in their diagnosis. And so the long-term vision is that model itself is what we're able to provide as a service to the wider world. So plugging it into GP practices, plugging it into different healthcare systems globally, because healthcare is a global issue. People are roughly the same in every single country. So you'd be able to say, hey, this is how we use algorithms to be able to diagnose and maintain, monitor, titrate in asthma management, in blood pressure management. And because it's data-led, you can go down to like genomics or ethnicity data. You can go down to population specific, like cohorts, rather than just what we have right now, which is large-scale population. So yeah, I imagine we'll be doing a lot more in the software world as well as fulfillment. I expect we would be not just UK-based by that point. I also expect us to go into compounding. So compounding is the act of making medication. It comes from a hypothesis that I have that, we're generating all this data. There's all these talks about, do you ever sell the data to big pharma? And, the goal is to be around for 30 years. So why can't we become little pharma? Why can't we step away from this, single dosage, single tablet applies to everyone, to this bespoke, compounded, multivariation medication actually is good for the individual. And because we do own the whole chain, you can actually have it provide value, and you can do the outcome management at the end. So to get the results, to say, is this actually making this person better? Compounding is a thing. It's just really difficult to find the clinicians who know enough to be able to prescribe, and then to not burden the patient to try and find the compound. So if you're able to build it yourself, the whole end-to-end sequence, you're able to gift people a much more personalized version of healthcare, which I think is where we're ultimately going to get with all the data we have in the world. I also expect us to do this not just through the short number of partners that we have. So Evaro's business model is we run a direct-to-consumer version called e-surgery that lets people access medication directly through our brand. We use that as a proof of concept space to test things. And then actually we power some of the other online pharmacies in the world, and so the UK, and some of the kind of direct-to-consumer brands that might want to be in pharmaceuticals. So for example, we work with Clue, the period tracking app. They're able to offer free contraception for their customers. So we get reimbursed by the NHS. We offer their customers generally free contraception. We dispatch to them to the next day, where clinically appropriate. And Clue gets an additional format of revenue. We reduce the burden to the NHS. We get revenue, and the patient gets this free treatment. So literally a 4 winners rule. Like, this is not a zero-sum game. Yeah.
So it's only a few things you want to do in the next 2 years, yeah? Not much going on in this. Yeah. But what would you say you're proudest of before we go to the quick fire questions? Like, of all this stuff you've done so far and obviously made such an impact, but what would you say you're proudest about?
Generally, I'm really proud about the team that we're building. The way that I look at everyone there, it's very much around building like a healthcare mafia of tomorrow. You obviously have the PayPal mafia in the early days. Those early employees have then gone on to scale exceptional businesses, and the knowledge and the audacity and that delusion that we talked about that you learn from being somewhere that's successful, even if it's for a short period of your career journey, fills you with confidence that it can be done. So we've had people who've joined us as box packers in the warehouse, and they've now gone on to do data apprenticeships. We have people who join, and I had a PA who joined me. I asked her what's her life dream. She said she wanted to be a bookkeeper. I was like, no, honey, you're going to be an accountant. And I imagine one day she'll end up being a financial controller, if not more. We've had people who joined us as like website administrators, who are project managers, who I think could one day be chief technology officers. And I think the biggest thing that I derive a lot of joy from is actually having that impact on someone's, just expanding someone's world. Because actually, if you've never seen it, if you haven't seen the role model, if you haven't even considered it, there's no way you're going to even open yourself up to that opportunity.
So it's been so great to hear your story today. And I think it's the whole thing you said earlier about that you wanted to be exceptional.
Yeah.
And I feel like you've kind of proven that you are already, right? And I know there's a 30-year journey, and there's a lot more to come, but it's amazing what you've been able to build so far. So we're going to get to quick fire questions now. So first one is, who are 3 Asians in Britain you think are doing incredible work, and do you want to shout them out?
So I will first shout out Sam Patel at Day Lewis. I think for all intensive purposes, the Day Lewis team could have been seen as a competitor to us. And he has been incredibly graceful with his time, with his thought processes, with collaboration. He approaches the kind of the healthcare, the pharmacy world as a rising tide will raise all ships. And actually watching another leader have that approach rather than thinking, this is my territory. It's been quite inspirational, and I definitely have had my way of thinking about the healthcare world and collaboration across what could otherwise be considered competitors shaped by our interactions. Neil Shah at the London Stock Exchange. Huge credit to Neil. He is probably one of the most amazing human beings with such a good heart, who always just wants to help. Lots of nudges to consider the LSE as part of our IPO track. But it's just someone who has abundant love and joy for the community and just wants to give. And finally, Angie Ma from faculty. I joined a group of founders a few years ago who meet every second Thursday of the month. It's this kind of coaching, peer mentorship with companies that are bigger than you or around you, and everyone kind of going through their own learnings. There's been many Thursdays where I have had the wisdom of everyone in that group, but specifically Angie, who's another woman in business who's leading an incredible AI company, and just the kind of personal challenges. And the way I think at one point she was like, hey, like as part of the coaching session, founder to founder, you ask each other like, oh, close your eyes, sense and feel what the ideal scenario would be, share the feelings. And at one point I shared my feelings and she's like, none of that was feelings. That was a what? I was like, oh wow, I've been really like, that's having a mirror really shown at you. I didn't share any feelings. I was like, oh, this is exactly how we solve the problem. I'm just gonna sense it. And having that a friend to actually hold up that mirror to you was really helpful.
So they're all great, but then Neil Shah's obviously one that introduced us. So shout out to Neil. And I think he's going to love what you just said about him as well. I feel like you've just made his day when he listens to this as well.
He's the standard of what gentlemen should be. Like really, really like blatantly out there. It's just, I don't know anyone who doesn't adore him.
And if people want to find out more about you and find out more about Evaro, where do they go to?
So I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on thuria@evaro.com. If you want thuria@evaro.com for emails. And also if you reach out directly to anyone at the Evaro team, we'd be delighted. We're obviously still hiring. I think we're going to go into a phase of mergers and acquisitions next year. So if anyone's in the healthcare space and wants to slip into our inbox, we'd be keen to hear from you.
And is there any other way that people can help you who are listening today?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think there is a lot of learning that we've taken from different industries, not healthcare specifically, because I think healthcare is lagging in some ways. So I run actually a Sunday roast club every other Sunday. If anyone wants to have an invite, I'm actually going to put a public call. Like if you're a founder of another company and you want to come over for a homemade Sunday roast, I will have the audacity to say I'm an exceptional cook. Please come over. I think that sensation of community, that sensation of just understanding other people's struggles and the struggles they've had and they've managed to resolve. We learn so much from each other. And as I said, this is not a competitive world. We have so much to be able to give. So yeah, if people want to get invited to a Sunday roast at London, this is a genuine opportunity. I've had loads of other founders who, instead of being able to organize a business meeting, I'm like, hey, our diaries don't align. How do you feel about 5 p.m. on a Sunday? And I've got a few friends already coming. It's people who might be like in the VC world or who are lawyers. And usually everyone just has a great time. It's this whole, if you want to have a village, you have to be a villager. But then you've got the learnings from maybe what's happening in apps and video games and this concept of speed to dopamine, and us taking that from a healthcare perspective. How do we give our patients a sensation of dopamine when they're being burdened to give us their health information? How do you learn from online banking? How do you learn from dating apps? How do you learn from just all the different things that are out there to be able to apply that lateral thinking?
So thanks again so much for coming on. Any final words to the audience?
I think my final words would be, watch all the other episodes. I watched quite a few in the build up to this, and there were so many golden nuggets in there. And finally, like, just believe in yourself. Like, have the audacity to be delusional. Take a moment, in the same way that we do business values, write out your own personal values as a human being. Try and live by them, because then we're living a lot more intentionally, and we're actually able to move ourselves forward in an otherwise quite messy world.